Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Monday morning. Thank you for being with us today. I hope you had a lovely weekend, and as always, thank you for joining us for our Bible reading this morning as we continue our journey through the Psalms. And today we're in Psalm 24. It's a reasonably well-known one. You might recognise the bit at the end, possibly. But anyway, without further ado, it's a beauty. Here goes, Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's, and all that is in it, the world and all who live in it. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it on the rivers. Who can ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? Those who have clean hands and a pure heart, who have not lifted up their souls to what is false, and do not swear deceitfully. They will receive a blessing from the Lord, and vindication from the God of their salvation. Such is the company of those who seek him, of those who seek the face of the God of Jacob. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, ye ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, Psalm 24. We used to sing it at school, I seem to recall, a long time ago. If you look at Psalm 24 carefully, you'll see that it fits neatly into three sections, and they're kind of a bit clunky the way they work together. But this psalm, they're bigger. There's the first two verses, which talks about the kind of glory, about like a hymn of praise to God. That's the first two verses. Then we got verses 3 to 6, which are really about the kind of people who can go to get into God's presence and ascend the hill of the Lord, a bit like that. And then the third part is a bit like a kind of question and answer session, who is God? And it goes on like that, the King of glory, and so on and so on and so on. So you've got three sections in here, verses 1 and 2, which are a hymn of praise to God, verses 3 to 7, 3 to 6, which are about who are the kind of people who can come into God's presence. And then you've got 7 to 10 at the end, a question and answer session all about the mighty glory of God. The question is, I suppose, how does it all fit together? I think in reality, the whole psalm is really it's just a massive talk about the glory of God. I think that's what pours through every verse, and it's three kind of ways of putting it. So, in the first two verses, try and take this a bit at a time. In the first two verses, you've got this hymn of praise to God. You've got the earth is the Lord's and all that fills it, and the world and all who dwell therein, for it's founded upon the seas and established it on the rivers. Now, what you've got here basically is saying, firstly, it's saying who owns the world. It's saying it is God's world. The earth is the Lord's. The earth, if you like, is his property. God owns it. God made it. It is God's world. And whatever it may seem like from time to time, this world is God's world. He made it, and it's his property. But not only did he make it, there's something very significant in here as well. He didn't just make it, he founded it upon the seas and established it on the rivers. I think what this is saying here is God did not just make the world. God didn't just, put lots of atoms down in the right place and so on. God didn't just make the world, God ordered the world as well. Notice in the book of Genesis, the very book God created heaven, the earth was without form and void. And what God does in creation is make order out of chaos. God did not just make the world, God ordered the world. And God did not just make us, God orders, God brings order to our lives as well. This is not a chaotic world. God brings, it can be chaotic, but it is God brings order out of chaos. So note this in these first two verses, you've got here this hymn of praise to God, that God made the world, that it's his world, but not just that, but actually God creates order. And actually, when times in our lives feel rather chaotic, we can hang on to the fact that we have a God of justice and a God of order. God gives order out of chaos. However crazy the world may seem, we have a God who's bigger, a God who owns the world, and a God who creates order, a God who's reliable and dependable. So hear that in this hymn of praise at the first two verses. Then you've got this thing about who can ascend the hill of the Lord, who can stand in his holy place, and so on. And notice, as I said at the beginning, the psalm is basically about the glory of God. And notice that the bar, you might say, is set very high. You know, who are the people that can do it? Those who have clean hands and a pure heart, and so on. The moral bar, if you like, as I say, has been set very high. So that it's, you know, those who can enter God's presence have to get quite a high standard. And I think, as I said to you a few days ago, I think one of the problems that we can have in the church, we can get a bit too cuddly with God, almost like have God on our terms. Well, this reminds us actually to come into God's presence, you know, that the bar is set really high here. But notice, and it's very similar to Psalm 15 that we had a couple of weeks ago, what is required. Notice it's not some, you know, it's not that you put loads of money in the collection plate, much as important though that is, of course, I'm to say that. It's not that, you know, have to go through some liturgy or, you know, walk on your knees for half a mile. It's not something like that. It's not some ritual thing. It's actually about life. It's about those who have clean hands and a pure heart. So it's not just about what you do on a Sunday morning or a Saturday night, depends when you go to church or whatever. It's not just about what you do in the temple. It's about life. So the people who can ascend the hill of the Lord, those who can stand in the holy place, are those with clean hands and a pure heart, who've not pledged themselves to falsehood or sworn by what is a fraud. So you're talking about, you know, those who are, the entry requirement for God's presence is high, but notice it's not a ritual one, it's actually a moral one. It's actually about life. And the way we live our life outside the temple is vitally important in terms of what happens inside the temple. So it's like that as well. And notice also that for those, you know, who those who do seek God, those who do that, receive a blessing. So we have a God who loves us, who wants to give us a blessing as well. So the second section of the three in this psalm talks about who are the people who can enter God's presence, and it's the bar is set high, but notice it's a moral one. It's where you live your life. Not just what you do in the temple, not just having the right words and so on. And what's happening outside the temple is vital. What happens inside, but that we have a God who, when you do get to go God, is just dying to give us a blessing. Such as a blessing for those who seek Him in this way. So that's the second bit. And the third bit, you get this kind of question and answer session. You know, lift up your heads, O gates. Lift up your everlasting Lord. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty. The Lord mighty in battle, and so on. And what this is about really is that in those days, back in David's day, when a foreign dignitary or when a dignitary came to town, somebody very, very important, you know, they'd hang out the banners, they'd get out the bunting, they'd put out the red carpet. They'd also would raise the gates high to welcome this great person. And so when, I don't know, a king from a foreign land would come, or a victorious person would come home after a good battle or whatever it would be, they would, as I say, you know, they would get out the bunting and they'd lift high the gates to welcome this person, to give this person, you might say, a right royal welcome. And what it's saying here is, you know, lift up your heads, O ye gates, be lift up, you know, and the King of glory shall come in. And notice this is, this is the greatest of all. The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord who is mighty in battle, the Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. So, as you'd welcome a great king into the city of Jerusalem, actually welcome the Lord. So fling high the gates, you know, make it wide, open the doors, because let the King of glory shall come in. And it doesn't come much greater than him. And I suppose in a sense, there's a pretty obvious message for us here, isn't there? In our lives, you know, God never imposes himself on anybody. Someone say God is the perfect gentleman. But actually what this is saying, and I think the message to you and I is the door of our lives. You know, Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the door, I'll come in and enter him, and so on. And then what this is saying is, you know, fling wide the gates of your life, that the King of glory shall come in. The Lord who is strong and mighty, the Lord who is mighty in battle, the Lord of hosts. It means the Lord of everything, the Lord of the angels, the Lord of the hosts, the Lord of everything. That the King of glory, and there's a message to us, you know, fling wide the gates, that the King of glory might come into your life and my life. So Psalm 24, an absolute beauty this morning, into three sections, verses 1 and 2, all about the God's owning the world, God creating the world, and God ordering the world, God being order out of chaos to the world, but also to our lives. Secondly, who can come into God's presence? The bar is set very high, but it's a moral bar, not a ritualistic one. And that's what's required. So what happens outside the temple is just as important as what happens in, but that we have a God who's dying to give us blessing. But finally, this great King of glory, fling wide the gates. He was saying to the city, fling wide the gates, that the King of glory shall come in. And the same is true to us today. Let's fling wide the gates of our lives, that the King of glory may come into us too. God bless you. Have a lovely day, and Psalm